Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on Improving Talks. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Devlin Liles, Chief Consulting Officer at Improving, who will be talking to us today about the state of the technology industry. I would, before we get started, direct your attention to the Q&A feature that is located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use that to ask them, and I will give them voice to Devlin at the appropriate point. With that said, Devlin, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Probably the most prevalent question I get nowadays is kind of what we're seeing in the industry. Because there's volatility, there's mixed messaging, there's conflicting information, and there's also a lot of sales and trying to gloss over some of the nitty-gritty details. And so this talk came out of kind of what that state looks like and what the read on it is, and then how to help the job market, the community, clients, companies prepare for the next 12 months so they can find success in that turmoil. So give you a little bit of kind of introduction to this. First off, any picture you see other than graphs, charts, data-centric things, I actually generated with AI. As a part of this talk, we're going to talk about some of those pieces, and it took 15-20 minutes to get the right pictures going. But that was part of the conversation we're going to have today. The second one is we're talking about predicting the future, which is notoriously hard to do. And I'm not all knowing. I don't have special powers, and I'm going to have to generalize. Otherwise, we'll be here at dinner time. And as much as I'd like to share dinner with everybody, turns out I have other things that I've got to get done, and I've got a family that would like to see me as well. So I'm going to generalize to keep us within kind of our allotted time box. There are going to be specific examples you can point to in which some of these generalizations aren't true. I'd encourage you, have those questions ready, come at it with an open mind, and we may even continue the conversation offline and after the fact. Now, diving in, we're going to talk about my short list. The volatility in the market and what's happening with jobs and kind of the layoff culture and the hype that's been going off around that, the low code and no code space. We're going to look at kind of where languages are going in the next few years, as well as cybersecurity and what that's doing to our landscape. And then we're going to dive into what's next for blockchain after the FTX fiascos and Bitcoin and all of those cratering values. Is that the end of blockchain? And then lastly, we're going to dive into AI and machine learning, a topic that I am greatly passionate about, but needs a little bit of realism in the ChatGPT hype. So let's dive into volatility in markets. Now, I look at TrueUp.io, I look at Layoffs FYI, I look at a bunch of different websites looking at job trends. We also pay for jobs data and jobs reports. And so what you're going to see is a combination of those things in the read of the landscape. I pulled probably the two most seminal graphs that I've kind of used to encapsulate this over the last 12 months. On the left-hand side is the number of tech company employees let go. This is companies who identify as technology firms. This doesn't include the broader IT space as a whole or consulting services, those kind of things. If you add all those up, you're looking at over 500,000 jobs lost in the IT sector across the US in the last 12 months. To put that in perspective, that's 25% larger than when the dot-com bubble burst in 2001. That's 5 times larger than the job losses in the IT sector in 2008 during the financial crisis. So this is not something to be ignored. But the worst part about it is the compounding effect of we're also seeing lower hiring, which is the number of open job roles through hiring freezes and those kind of things. This is more emblematic of fear in the market than it is emblematic of a significant change of direction. Now that fear is causing us to question some of our base assumptions, and it's going to have some lasting impacts. If you look at salaries in the tech space, between 2001 and 2011, they were largely flat adjusted for inflation. Or in some cities across the country, mildly negative, where the dot-com bubble and the overhiring An overabundance of qualified candidates actually caused salary reduction, salary depression over a 10-year span. The average before that, in the leading up kind of 6 to 7 years before the dot-com bubble, was 10 to 15% raises and increases, and then kind of a return to mean or a return to reality that came in after that. What we're seeing is the market shaping up to do the same. Does that mean that you're going to have to be prepared to accept lower salaries, those kind of things? If you're on the job market, you find yourself out on the job market because of layoffs and those kind of things, likely yes. Readjusting kind of those expectations is going to be a part of it, because companies are going to have to be more frugal as volatility in the market causes them to question financial decisions and really make sure that they're running in a lean way that can survive that downturn. The second piece of that is making sure that you pick your investments, your time, and the value you bring to the table in a significantly more kind of intentional way. Now, if I look at this as an overall trend, it's also having a piece added to it, which is the remote work. Now, I'm not great at remote work, but the flexibility is phenomenal. I'm much more productive in the office. We have, however, a great number of improvers who are more productive from home. Now, there's an added complexity to this, which is in the globalization of the IT market and the remote work prevalence that came in post-COVID. There's a lot of questions happening amongst CFOs and CEOs of, well, if they're never going to be in our office anyway, why don't we move them to insert this country here? That could be India, the Philippines, that could be Eastern Bloc of Europe, although the geopolitics that we'll talk about here in a little while has made that a less attractive area for the moment, but that will pass. LATAM, with its significant overlap in time zones to the United States, is driving a lot of that. Now, one of the things to note is that the globalization market for our outsourcing is about $92 billion pre-COVID in total contract value annually. It's projected to be over $105 billion this year. That increase is being caused by a lot of the cost-cutting measures. Over 80% of the companies that go that direction actually cite cost as a significant player into their decision-making. And this is making it harder for entry-level software developers to come into the market, because the cost benefit of long-term loyalty of investing and growing a more junior person is no longer showing up in the market. People are jumping jobs every 2 to 5 years in hopes of higher salaries, different flexibility, different benefits, those kind of things. And so it's harder and harder to justify the entry-level salaries. So that's actually where we see significant salary depression across the market, is in that entry-level space. They've retreated over 7% in the last 2 years alone. Whereas the 3 to 5 year experience space is actually where we see the greatest salary increases, which is typical. The IT industry has seen that trend for the last 20 years. Now, there's another piece that goes into this, which is the need for efficiency, automation, digitalization has never been greater, but the job market is softening. Now, when that happens, we see big surges in the low-code and no-code solution space. And this time is very similar to the previous times. The difference is that the technology, with machine learning models and neural networks and some of our more generative AI and chatbots, those kind of things, we're actually seeing significantly more success in this space, which is at a huge number of either startups or existing platforms continually reinvesting in the low code and no code space, either to make their somewhat technical team members far more effective, or to make their non-technical team members able to get from no process to some process. And most of the time that's enough. You typically can run on that some process version of canned automation, robotic process automation, RPA, those kind of things. You can run on that for years in some cases, and potentially for small business never have to move beyond it. And so you're seeing a burgeoning market in this space. The expectation is the low code and no code space over doubles in the next 12 months. And so things like Power Platform in the Azure space is going to drive a significant amount of the small business activity that we see coming down. Out of the box integrations, customizations, that's where the focal point is going to be for companies that choose one of those RPA platforms, is going to be around how do we then tie it to places it doesn't talk to naturally. Does it have an out-of-the-box plugin with my accounting system or my document system? If not, that's where we're going to need that custom development. It's a much smaller shim of the technology market. The other side of it is this does not typically play well in the IoT space. The RPA platforms typically don't work well there because of the customization of each of those hardware platforms. So I think you'll see a bigger turn to the kind of heavy hitter engineers and computer scientists moving into the IoT space if they're not moving into kind of blockchain supportive as well as AI and ML integrated. You'll see that move to that low code, no code platform. For entry level developers, entry level into the industry, this is actually a great way. You can ramp up very quickly on these. There's online certifications, those things that are either cheap or free and very easy to access. And what you can use is this as an entry point to a career. Now, keep in mind that this is cyclic. When the economy recovers and we're seeing year-over-year growth and we're seeing continued reinvestment and we're seeing those things, these platforms have a tendency to hit their barriers, at which point custom development is then what replaces them. Now, if you're in that space, it is a call to continued growth. It is a call to continuing to invest and using this as an entry point, not an exit point to your career. Then moving on from the low code and no code space, we're going to kind of talk about one of my favorite pieces is I get the conversation often from friends, family, colleges where I mentor to startup and community spaces. What language should I choose? Now, largely language you should choose as a business owner is a conversation around who can I hire most cost effectively to accomplish the goals of the program I have. Most of these languages are kind of polyfunctional. They allow you to address many different toolkits with add-ons and frameworks and those kind of things. So from there, it's mainly a hiring and prioritization question. However, if you're getting into the industry as a developer or a technical consultant, those kind of things, you're going to want to know kind of what's trending and what's failing. So JavaScript continues to rule the roost. It is the most popular language currently being developed on. Typically, this is about 12.4 million developers kind of worldwide are day in and day out working in the JavaScript space. This is two reasons. One is a heavy amount of boot camps and entry levels and retooling firms focus on JavaScript because it's very low barrier to entry. And you can get to proficiency or you can get to kind of functionally aware very, very rapidly. And so most of the entry level and mid-level roles, that's where they started. You'll see a lot of kind of mean stack, MERN stack, kind of node function folks who are living in that space. And that's driven a lot of the popularity. Now, beyond that, Python continues to expand. Now, Python's been around a long time. It's been doing web development, those kind of things, but it really shines in the AI and ML space and the IoT space. And so you're seeing more and more folks picking up 2 and 3 languages in their career. Typically that second or third language is Python if it wasn't their primary language. And this allows them to expand into things like TensorFlow or working on hardware integration platforms that have memory accessors, those kind of things that are just far easier in the Python kind of ecosystem. Now, Java has been falling from the top of this list for about 15 years now. This is a combination of it's fairly heavy to get into and had a heavily fragmented SDK structure for the software development kit. And so you had Java developers on certain versions that couldn't go to other versions. You had the enterprise Java or J2EE, J3, all that. And then you had kind of the Java variant platforms. When this got all consolidated by Oracle, that fragmentation went away, but it also drove a lot of people to reconsider their investment in Java when there were easy to jump to alternatives like C# or Kotlin or those kind of things. And so you see Java continuing to shed developers at a fairly quick pace. They've been falling down this list for a little while now, whereas Python's at about 9.1 million people using it. Java, previously over 10 million, is down to 8.2. And you see that continued slide into their future. C++ and C aren't going anywhere. They're niche, they're targeted at very specific things, discrete mathematics, gaming, 3D rendering, these kind of things, and they shine in that space. But they're going to continue to kind of stay static, maybe decline a little bit, in those niches because there's not a better answer in those areas. AR and VR is still a huge amount in this space. The toolkits for AR and VR are still developed on these because of the processing performance and the capacity in those languages. PHP was at one time kind of the darling child of any beginning web dev. And year after year after year, we continue to hear horror stories in enterprise development because of security issues and difficulty in maintaining the platforms and those kind of things. So a lot of the kind of larger enterprises that drive huge amounts of software development have moved away from this as a platform. Still very effective in the small business space, but you see it continuing to drop. PHP was over 9 million people developing in it. It's down to about 6 million now. C#, slowly expanding. It's been moving kind of steadily picking up 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 a year for several years now. It's about 6 million. And so it's closing that gap. A lot of the new C# developers that are active in the platform are refugees from some of those other changes we already talked about. Swift, very stable. The iOS platform's not going anywhere. It's still the dominant king in the mobile space, right? It's Android, iOS, you got to have both. But if you only get to pick one, the vast majority of folks are going iOS because of the mind share, because of the kind of existing consumer base. And that's going to continue to drive Swift for iOS native. But the advent of multi-platform and those kind of things with Xamarin, with React Native, with Maui, all of these are driving into other languages with near that same level of effectiveness. So you'll see Swift less as a primary skill set unless you're an iOS specialist, and more of an augmented skill set for a well-rounded mobile developer. And then Kotlin, continuing to grow, but incredibly impressive when you talk about integrating into machine learning and AI spaces. Lives in the Java ecosystem, very healthy language and growing. It's up to about 2.3 million folks. Swift, stable, about 2.4, has been for a couple of years now. And then you've got Go. Go continues to the trend of kind of falling off. Solid language, had Google behind it, still does, but it's never really found a place where it could shine from its competitors of what its language was there for. There's always been kind of a near parity or better than parity competition for it. So it hasn't found the place like Swift or C++ where it could really carve out an area. So you get a lot of enthusiasts, and it had this kind of burst cycle. It'll become popular for 6 months and then fall off. Now, all of these things give us a kind of view into the world. And I expect that, I listed where these are kind of at based on our research, as well as where we see them going, primarily because if I'm looking at building a new application and I haven't picked the technology stack, this will give me a good information for how I'm going to go do that. Am I building for a very specific niche like AR, VR, AI, and ML, something like that? Am I building for a general enterprise consumption or B2B, those kind of things? And this, or B2C consumer-based stuff, this allows me to kind of make the right technology choice without having to do the hours of research that drives our kind of view on this. Any questions before I move on? That's a whole lot of kind of, here's where we're at in the job market and continuing trends.
There are no questions at the current time.
Fantastic. So moving on, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and by favorite, I mean least favorite, cybersecurity. So geopolitical strife causes cybersecurity to become a more and more prevalent conversation. Looking at some of the Microsoft Defense publications, there's an attack on Azure every 39 seconds. Now that's just Azure. If I expand that out to the rest of the infrastructure, primarily around US-based companies, European-based companies, you're seeing thousands of attacks a day, right? And some of these are distributed denial of service, some of them are ransomware, some of them are malware, but you're seeing a vast increase in this. This is hugely larger than it was just 5 years ago. A couple of reasons for this. One is the rapid digitalization of infrastructure and working norms caused us to enter places that allowed for security attack vectors that didn't exist before, right? When we all went home for the COVID pandemic, a lot of our home networks have significantly less security than the corporate managed networks that we were coming from. And so we had to open up things like firewall rules and VPN tunnels. And what this did was it created additional attack vectors, as well as it loosened the bounds that we were able to manage, monitor, and contain some of these intrusions. So explosions of bot networks and those kind of things. We've also seen a vast increase in state-sponsored hacking and sabotage, sometimes for a purpose, sometimes purely for disruption. And so cybersecurity spending is expected to exceed $188 billion. And that is on prevention, remediation, et cetera, right? We're also looking at 70% of different organizations saying that they're seeing a labor shortage in the cybersecurity space. This is one of those booming areas of IT that if you're just looking at getting into it, take a look at cybersecurity. Both prevention, secure application development, infrastructure, platform engineering, all of these are going to become more and more important in the next 3 to 5 years, and especially in 2023, as we continue to see kind of geopolitical strife ratchet up with the tensions between kind of the US and NATO allies and Russia and Ukraine, seeing some of that political strife in Asia Pac with the US and allies and China. And when I look at it, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, these are where a lot of the state-sponsored pieces are coming from. That's not a statement of political allegiance. That's just the facts of where the attacks originate, as published by a lot of these different defense and analysts on the overall cybersecurity around the world. And so when we look at this, the IoT market's going to explode, which creates additional cybersecurity vectors. We're going to see continued use of a remote-focused US-based IT industry. And we're going to look at a kind of increasing gap of knowledge between the foremost of the cybersecurity space and the average. So you'll see bigger focuses on spending around like cybersecurity training, those kind of things in the enterprise. You'll also see the baseline conversation change from one of, do we need to do anything, to what more can we do? Because it's not a question of if you're going to have a breach in the network, if you're going to get hacked, if you're going to leak data. The question is when and how bad. And so a lot of this is going to be prevent defense rather than reactive response.
Devlin, we had a question about whether or not, if you're getting started in cybersecurity, you feel it is better to start your career on the application development side or the operational side of that field?
So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. It's a great question, right? The biggest need that we have today is on the infrastructure and prevention side for detection, remediation, implementation of SIEMs, integration of those. The most lucrative in the long term is kind of DevSecOps aware application developers who are building these kind of secure platforms from the start. And so once you're in, a lot like the low code and no code solution, it's a great entry point to get in on infrastructure. But the most lucrative version, I'm talking about salary, benefits, compensation, upward mobility, is going to be on the application development or the architecture side, in which you're going to need both sets of knowledge. So you're going to have to get in and grow. There's really not a get in and park career mode in IT any longer, given how fast things are moving. So you really do have to get in and then pick what your second and third skill sets are going to be, and then go intentionally about growing those over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's why you'll see that 7 to 10% increase in the 3 to 5 year salary bands across the industry, whereas entry levels are getting smaller, is because the value difference between somebody who can play in more than one arena is huge. So one last thing to talk about here is that the US, while it makes up a huge amount of the cloud and infrastructure companies, US-based companies actually get about 46% of all global attacks are aimed at US-based companies. Now, this is primarily money motivated. Over 86% of cybercrime and cybersecurity incidences have some kind of monetization strategy, either by attacking a company, hacking it, and leaking documents while shorting the stock to create a stock drop that you can profit on. We saw this with some of the Sony stuff. You could see Obviously, I'm not advocating for that. That's illegal stock manipulation, but most of these are organized crime units or state sponsored. You'll also see things like disruption based, like the Colonial Pipeline, ransomware, and those kind of things, where the idea is to disrupt the normal flow of operations. And 58% of companies in the next 12 months will have some kind of respondable security incident. That is something that has to be remediated and communicated out. And so this is a very real thing as you're getting into this. Now, the good news is there's some very basic steps, and almost every major provider is moving those basic steps from optional to required because they're the ones getting hit. AWS, GCP, GCP, Azure, Oracle's cloud, all of these are becoming bigger and bigger targets because of how much of the market they have and the number of companies that rely on them to solve these problems. And so they're actually pushing the industry forward in this space in good ways. But just because you're on the cloud doesn't mean it comes out of the box. Having a good security advisor on your platform engineering team or having a good external for validation are going to be critical to how this drives forward. This is the daily DDoS attacks graphs published by Microsoft for the Azure ecosystem. This is the Azure public ecosystem, not their governmental or anything else. So you'll notice this ramp up through the holidays. The most disruptive time to take down e-commerce sites for business continuity and those kind of things is during that holiday surge. And so you see a lot of this. You'll also see that this mirrors some of the geopolitical events that we've seen. Hacktivism is making a return in most of Eastern Europe and some of Asia Pac as a way to go about exerting the opinions of a small group through hacking and intrusion and those kind of things. Now, we've been talking about some doomy and gloomy things, and I want to talk about something that makes us all a lot happier. Cryptocurrency, because it's doing great right now. FTX is fine, ignore the hype, and Bitcoin is going back to 100,000. Let's ignore the fact that FTX is not doing fine. Bitcoin was never at 100,000. We've got to talk about two separate constructs here: blockchains and cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies have always been kind of an iffy piece to the equation because the idea of highly volatile, utterly unregulated currency is concerning because of the amount of influence it gives to bad actors with malintent. Now, Bitcoin, Ethereum, those guys, they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing great things, and they drove hugely the initial interest in the blockchain technology space. But what we're going to see is over the next year, the conversation shifts away from cryptocurrency to blockchain as a technology and what it brings to the table. Now, the collapse of cryptocurrency's market value has had little to change to the value of blockchain as a technology itself. A blockchain, if you don't understand this technology space, is effectively an independently audited ledger of the things you say to know if they're true, the transactions, the documentation, et cetera. And the way it does that is that every node is running some fairly advanced mathematics and cryptographic algorithms to verify that you haven't changed anything in the past when you added your new record. This gives us kind of a tamper-proof or tamper-resistant system without needing a centralized authority that everybody agrees to trust. Now, in some cases, it's a company running that kind of blockchain in which I say, I'm going to trust this company. In the case of healthcare records, it might be the healthcare software provider. And I'm going to trust that company. I'm going to access my healthcare records, and all of it goes in there, and I can watch the audit chain of my records and away it goes. I can also see where the access is, what pieces are going in there, and it's secured but verified. I can do this with transaction history for like automotive collections. There's some wicked cool stuff happening in the space. One of the winners of Code Launch in Dallas was in this space. You'll see a lot of this around legal documents and digital evidence chains to be able to say, no, we collected these files off of the suspect's hard drive, and we can guarantee they haven't been manipulated because we've secured them as a part of a blockchain. And so you see a lot of these interesting spaces in which blockchain, by definition, allows us to tackle problems that we couldn't tackle in the past with a level of trust from the community that didn't exist. Now, cryptocurrencies have taken a big trust hit, but blockchain as a whole and that audited credential set, folks like Topple and several others are really doing some interesting things in this space. A lot of startups are going to start leveraging this when it comes to medical device records and being able to track auditably where the parts for my car came from to make sure that the very large and growing stolen parts markets, I'm not getting parts that have been kind of fenced. I'm getting, new or remanufactured that were legally obtained, these kind of things. You'll see a lot of startups in this space. Now, if I'm just getting into the industry, looking at a place where independent verification gives the market trust in my delivery, trust in my product, like documentation. If I'm selling a high value object, whether that's art or jewelry or vehicles or houses, then it's worth the cost of putting all that evidence onto a blockchain, because then I have a answer to, hey, give me the Carfax for that house. Here it is. And it gives us that trusted third party to verify that. And you'll see a lot more of those types of things in the industry. So while cryptocurrencies may be in their death spiral, I think the underlying technology is going to play a bigger and bigger part in the market. You hear a lot of this under the umbrella of Web3, right? IoT, blockchain, AI, ML. And I see that still kind of pushing forward this year, and we're going to see some interesting use cases. We're already seeing some of them today. So now I'm going to give you my resume. We're going to jump into the AI and ML portion of our conversation if there's no questions before we jump on. I will take Tim's silence as a we're good to go. All right. So I asked ChatGPT to write a bio for me and list some of the places I've worked. And its answer was that I worked at Improvement. That's absolutely true. I worked at Paraveda and I held a senior manager position. It's very confident about that. I never worked at Paraveda. Halliburton, where I was a software development team lead. Nope, still not true. Citibank, nope, never done any work for them. And I definitely wasn't a senior development, software development engineer. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, never happened. Was not a senior developer there. This highlights one of the problems we're seeing with some of the hype around generative AI. It is very confidently wrong, provably wrong. Now, the problem with provably wrong is, to know it's wrong, I have to know the answer before I ask the question. I know my resume. I know everywhere I've worked. I know every client I've worked on. But somebody else doesn't. If they got this list, what would they think? Would they treat it as true? It's very confident with position details and what I worked on. Unfortunately, this highlights one of the problems with our understanding of AI. We believe because AI can add detail, that means that it's accurate. But unfortunately, this type of AI is actually just predicting what the most likely next word or set of words would be acceptable or upvoted or whatever would be. It has no concept of what those words mean. It has no concept of whether they're true or not. It has scanned hundreds of millions of websites, and it's just looking for patterns in language. And so these sound reasonably understandable. They sound detailed. And as humans, we fill in the gaps and go, well, there must be references to that. By the way, if I asked GPT for references, it would actually give me references. And in some cases, those references would just be made up because it doesn't know I'm asking it to prove how it made those statements. It's just generating what it thinks a reference would look like. And in some cases, those references do not exist. In other cases, they exist, but they're utterly about something else. And so we run into this problem of using it as a part of the creative process is fine. It makes sense. And it actually makes us significantly faster, whether that's SEO and content generation, because a blank page is something horrible to stare at. But once you've got something on the page, then you can go, no, disagree with that. And you can edit, you can reframe, you can change. And it really is conversational. But when we get into provable facts, when we get into learning and trying to teach, that's where these type of AI systems that we're seeing a huge prevalence around with the GPT-3 and other large language models. The problem with them is they have no concept of truth. And we're layering on a belief of truth, because for a human being to know that level of detail, we assume they went and researched and they fact checked. Have you ever heard somebody throw down a fact at a party and then go, wait, that can't be true? And then you look it up and it turns out it's absolutely not true. It just happened to be in an article somewhere. And the article was from a somewhat reputable source, showed up on a news feed. Some news agency published the link to it, and it looks reputable. We don't have AI that can discern truth because human beings are bad at discerning truth. So if we move past the hype, because there's a lot of hype, especially like, I love my cybersecurity picture of a fracturing world. I love my crystal ball. Those creative uses of AI are phenomenal, and I'll continue to use them. I'll continue to use ChatGPT to help me with refining outlines and helping me to write articles. But I'm not going to use it when there's something I need to look at truth and facts. All of the data, the research in this presentation, I had to do. ChatGPT wouldn't do it for me because it doesn't know what that data means. It doesn't even know if that data is real. It just makes it up. And so I have to bring something to the table. So let's look past the hype. Let's look past the kind of current craze around generative AI and look at what real trends of AI are going to look like in the coming year. AI democratization will continue. We're going to continue to push AI out far and wide, whether that's through AWS's offerings, GCP's offerings, Azure's offerings, which, by the way, all three are phenomenally good. They're good in different areas, but there's an out-of-the-box model for image and video recognition and object detection from Azure that's fantastic, and you don't even have to train it yourself. I just use some of it to build collaborative neural networks to go through and analyze a vastly complex problem of human sentiment, asset values, and it was easy, or simple. Easy is the wrong term. That democratization and pushing tools to the edges so that developers and software platforms and low-code and no-code solutions, even Power BI, can then apply those things for anomaly detection and time window analysis. That's going to continue. Generative AI is going to get commercialized, good or bad. We can see bad actors auto-generating tons and tons of SEO content that sounds understandable until you realize it's nonsense, but it drives the SEO side of it. There's a lot of conversation around whether generative AI will ever kind of replace search engines. Keep in mind that I said that it doesn't know the difference between fact and not. Search engines are built to kind of index what's there, and you'll see this continue to be a conversation between them of like, how do we balance these two? How do we help people find truth? How do we apply ethics and explainability to the AI space? It's going to be a major part of the conversation. And so I see where in the next, year we saw, or in the previous 5 years, we've seen a lot of PhD, MD, and MBA folks starting medical device companies. We'll see a lot of CS, MIS, and philosophy majors influencing the IT community in huge ways, because social sciences, philosophy, and ethics are going to be some of the next bridges we have to cross as computer scientists. We have allowed computers into every part of our lives, from the cars we drive to the foods we eat to the houses that we talk to. And now it's a question of dealing with what that does to our society, and how do we build the society we want rather than just happening and stumbling into the one we get. And so if you're going to explore and try and dive into the AI space, it's a reminder to not only pursue the mathematic excellence that it's going to require, because it will. The linear algebra on the forefront right now is a huge thing, but also pursue the softer sciences. Pursue an understanding of philosophy and truth, and get good at rhetorical analysis, because we're going to have to apply the same level of discernment that we developed over 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years of learning and evolution as a society to the learning and evolution that's happening in our digital societies. So what do you do now? We've been talking for about 40 minutes, and it sounds a little doom and gloom, but it's not. The fortune favors the prepared. How do we get prepared? The first set, invest in your own learning and growth. Continue to grow an additional skill set, whether that be on the philosophy, ethics, social sciences side of AI, or if that is adding your second, your third, your fourth software language so that you can continue to move along these trends of the industry. Be ready for more change. When we talk about change as a constant, it is never more true than it is in technology. Some of the greatest software frameworks out there won't be part of the conversation in 5 years. There'll be some new hotness in the JavaScript space. The only thing that exceeds the number of DDoS attacks per minute in technology is the number of new JavaScript frameworks that get created. It's going to keep changing. And then look for high value places you can bring where you have significant data or labor or information gaps where you can apply AI and ML. Because by bringing those tools to bear in the democratizing AI space, you could actually change the outlook for the business you work for or the business you own in massive ways that they didn't predict, because AI and ML is kind of a hard to understand space. Look for where you have a lot of data, where you have a lot of people doing work, or where there's information disparity between two parties. Information disparity, like think of Carfax and what it did to the car economy. Look at housing histories and inspection results and those kind of things and what it did for the real estate economy. When we look at those spaces, if there's big data disparity, that's a good use case. If there's, however, a lot of labor, whether that's manual entry of data or analysis of data or gathering of it, that's also typically very good use cases. But this is a hard one. Adjust expectations, both within yourself, within the teams you interact with, that we're probably not going to see the explosive salary growth that we saw over the last 10 years in the next 2 years. Now, my hope is the economy recovers, we move out of this kind of geopolitical uncertainty and turmoil in the next 2 years, and that we're back into that upswing, and that everybody is making more money and succeeding to their wildest dreams. But I'm an optimist, being prepared for the realistic of it's probably going to be stagnant. Adjusted for inflation, roughly stagnant. Could you find places that will willingly pay more? Yes. But make sure you understand what they're asking you to bring to the table, because they're probably asking you to bring more to the table. Now, if you want to make more, you want to exceed that average as an industry, you got to do a little bit more, because it's easier and easier to justify the cost cutting of offshoring. We offshore about 300,000 jobs per year from the US. Every year we're taking 300,000 jobs out of the market because of cost primarily. So you've got to be able to make a value proposition, whether that's through social skills, ownership behavior, personal interaction, company culture. You've got to make an argument for why the value is there for here, not over there. So any questions, anything tickling your brain that you'd like an answer or an I don't know to?
So Devlin, we have a couple of questions queued up for you. The first is a question around the concept of DevOps. And is it just a market disruptor? Is it a methodology? Is it a job title? Like how and what trends are you seeing changing the landscape, and what skill sets are necessary to transition in DevOps?
It's a great question, because DevOps, system reliability engineering, platform engineering, you use any of the buzzwords. Like all great trends in technology, it started as some pure concepts. And then we started building tools and structure around it and started seeing success. That success then led others to want to mimic those things. And that led larger other firms to start branding things to get $5 an hour more. And that caused dilution, which then caused invalidation of those original core principles. Now, if I look at the Agile waves or the DevOps waves or the QA waves in our industry's history, unfortunately, they've all followed this trend. DevOps is a set of values and principles instilled in your development organization. It is not a set of tools. It is not a cloud platform. There is not, as a friend of mine, Donovan Brown, says, you can't just rub a little DevOps on it. but you do have to focus on it. So what we see moving the needle is being passionately dedicated to the delivery of software sustainably. And what I mean by that is viciously removing friction from the process unless the friction adds value, right? There are times where the little rumble strips on the highway help you slow down or bring you, awareness that you're veering out of your lane, right? Friction sometimes adds value, but not all friction does. And so the greatest of the DevOps pushes that we've seen is when it's a cultural transformation in the company around the process and values of delivering software. One of my favorite experiences working on a Scrum team, we didn't have anybody that did DevOps. It was kind of everybody's job. My favorite part of it is we had defined a definition of done. And one of the things was a code quality static analysis tool that we'd run, and it said it had no warnings. About 8 o'clock on the day of demo, we have a code freeze at 9. We get everything wrapped up, we run the build, there are warnings, and we can't resolve them before the code freeze pre-demo. And it stops one of the features we were going to ship that week from going to production. One of the things we had committed to in the sprint. And it's the proudest moment I've ever had working with a Scrum team because nobody tried to take credit for it. When we sat down with our stakeholders, we went, yeah, we failed to get that one out. It'll be out first day of next sprint, but we failed to meet our quality bar. We got questions over it, but nobody went, well, it's kind of done. We just have to it was like, no, it's not done. It will be done because that was the culture of quality software. Now, if you've never seen that culture in person, I'd encourage you to take a tour. If you're ever in Houston, reach out to Global Custom Commerce. They used to do tours. I'm sure they do. They still do at some points. Proudest moment, I was a consultant on that team. And I watched every member of that team own the decision that quality mattered and that we weren't going to bend to hit a velocity number under great pressure because we were expensive. We were rebuilding a massive platform for them, but the quality mattered more. And it turns out the CEO, the CFO, and the CMO, who were all at the demo, agreed with that assessment because principles, and DevOps is a set of values and principles, are only principles when they require sacrifice. Otherwise, they're convenience. So unfortunately, my answer is it's cultural, and culture change requires two things: dedicated delivery, dedicated discipline on the team, and support from the top. Because if we didn't have either of those, it would have failed.
And the final one would be, how would you suggest incorporating non-IT related skill sets into an IT team in a way that they can be successful? Do they have different performance metrics and the like?
Absolutely. So I'm gonna broaden the question a little bit because it depends on the skill set. Some skill sets integrate onto the team very well, right? Whether that's a SME, whether that is a marketing analyst who's then going to take and market that product out. Those integrate very, very well inside the team. But there are some that integrate before code hits keyboard, right? Where it's questions, right? There's chief ethics or chief philosophy officers at AI companies. Their job stops when code hits keyboard, right? Because at that point, the ethics of that software are kind of there to be displayed. Their job is to analyze the results and to inform the construction of the requirements and those kind of things. And so you've got to pick the right place that those skills play in. A lot like a product owner who's sitting over the shoulder of the developers going, that's not what I wanted, is disruptive. You've got to pick the right time, whether that's planning, whether that's refinement, whether that's product design. Those matter a lot. The one that I would say try and find a way in is try and find a way for your finance into your dev team. Every member of your dev team should be able to talk about the cost that it took in dollars to build something and the return on that investment in dollars or whatever your current currency is on what that produced. The best teams I've ever worked with had a very clear idea of what they were building, the value it was building, And they could then use that as a razor to go, is this important? Is it not? When making decisions day in, day out, minute in, minute out on writing the software. And so it's kind of a it depends answer. And I'm sorry for that, but it really depends on where the skill set would make the biggest impact.
All right, and one final question that just came in, Devlin. Companies are racing to deliver productized AI to the market. Is there anything to speak to the value of customized AI versus productized AI software?
Yes. So two things. I'm going to step back and answer a question you didn't ask, but I feel compelled because of the resume you saw earlier. Companies are rushing to get productized AI out. In that rush, there are going to be mistakes. So productized doesn't mean perfect. Be careful. Here be dragons. Second, I give this advice regardless of the tool, whether it's AI, whether it's software development. Buy unless it's tied to your core company differential, right? Like what makes you different than everybody else out there? At Improving, we're a professional services company. We, sell our team onto projects and we charge money for that. Our differentiator is not our accounting software, right? We need accounting software. We have to have it so that we can run our business, but it doesn't differentiate us in any meaningful way from our competitors. We're not going out there going, hey, we got this great thing over here. It's our accounting software. It's going to make your invoices look perfect. We don't do that, because it doesn't matter to our customers. So you know what we didn't do? We didn't build our own accounting software. Even though we could have, we have all the skill sets, we bought that because it's not a differentiator for us. Now, how we invest in our people, how we care about them, how we make sure that they're growing and following a lot of the things that you see on your screen right now, that's our differentiator. We want to make sure that every improver feels loved, invested in, and challenged. That's our differentiator. So we absolutely built the platform that we do that on. So the argument for productized AI versus customized AI or custom built AI, I would say use that as your biggest decision point. Is this the differentiator of our company, or is it something that we can buy? A general bought model that's up and running faster for something that's not your differentiator is fine. It's great. Like I said, I used it on some of the imagery in this, and I use it in a lot of our different proposals for generalizing simple problems and getting to prototype and value very quickly. Unless it's the core of that business, the differentiator that's going to make all the difference, that's where we customize. And that's where you spend as many dollars as you can afford.
That's all the questions we have for right now, Devlin.
Awesome. So I'm going to make Tim's life a little bit more difficult. And I'm going to say, we're going to try and help you accomplish these 5 things. First is, we do these talks every Wednesday at lunch. Please join us. There's a myriad of different topical areas, from deeply technical to agile to process to design. If you're looking to grow that second, third skill set, come here. It's free. We'll never charge you for it, I promise. Now, if you're looking to get together on that community side to build the connections and network to help you land that next place, or you have that community and you're looking for somewhere to meet, every one of our offices does this. So if you're in one of the places we operate and you need a place to meet for a user group or a professional group or a nonprofit, we do this. Come see us. Lastly, we help startups get going in this space, and we're doing this next week at Code Launch in Houston. If you're in the Houston space, join us. And if you're impacted by those job market things, we're hiring like a lot. And that's my entirely selfish pitch at the end of this before I hand this back over to Tim.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Devlin, for sharing your insights on the market and what's going on in technology. As Devlin mentioned, we are here every Wednesday, and we're looking forward to having you join us next week as we enter a month of March, where all of the talks will revolve around Agile and the Agile practices inside the enterprise. With that, I hope you all have a great day, and thank you for joining us at Improving Talks.